The French Revolution started with the meeting of the Estates Generales that was scheduled in 1789 due to France's debt. The majority of France's funds were spent supporting the American Revolution, leaving a great amount of debt to tax the people of France. To make things worse, the nobility and clergy were exceptions to those who had to pay taxes. Therefore, the peasants who had the least money were forced to pay them. Delegates stood in front of King Louis XVI in Versailles as he expressed his idea of voting by order to the First and Second Estates. The First Estate contained members of the Catholic clergy, while the Second Estate held the nobles. The Third Estate held the commoners and peasants, which caused their votes to be ignored. The unfairness caused the Third Estate to leave the Estates Generales and form their own group called the National Assembly. The commoners were locked out of the meeting hall and gathered in an indoor tennis court, taking the tennis court oath on June 20th, 1789. They promised not to leave until a constitution was passed. Louis XVI backed down and told the delegates of the First and Second Estates to join the Third Estate in the National Assembly. Louis XVI then ordered his army to gather outside of Paris to reform France's system of weights and measures. The National Assembly reorganized and formally changed its name to the National Constituent Assembly. Because King Louis was afraid of the uprising, he sent troops to Paris in order to calm the crowd. In response, fearing the military invasion, the people of France invaded the Bastille to gather arms and free the prisoners on July 14th. This event was one of the most important uprisings because it marked the end of King Louis's control over the people. The National Assembly also created the Declaration of Rights of Man. This promised that all men were born free and equal, with rights of liberty, property, and security. On October 5th, women marched the royal family in Versailles in demand for food and that the royal family go to Paris. King Louis stated that they had no food and agreed to return to Paris with the women. The importance of the National Assembly, which was controlled by the bourgeoisie, abolished all class distinction. With a cheering crowd, the king agreed to ratify the August decrees made by the National Constituent Assembly. With the passing of the decrees, the National Assembly began to abolish class rankings, parliaments, and taxes. It then began to organize elections for the new Legislative Assembly and move Versailles to Paris. However, the king still retained some power, such as the power to veto, but the National Constituent Assembly would also have the power to overrule it. On June 20th, 1791, the royal family attempted to flee Paris before getting caught in Varennes as they were recognized. The family was sent back to Paris as many debated about their leave. The National Assembly ruled that the king was abducted and gave the royal family their privileges back, which enraged the Jacobins. The Jacobin Club decided to protest against the king, constructing a petition to abolish the monarchy. At the end of September, the National Assembly met for the last time and agreed to dissolve and create the Legislative Assembly. This showed the transition from the absolute monarchy to the constitutional monarchy. The Legislative Assembly consisted of 745 deputies, in which about half of the deputies were Jacobins. The Jacobins consisted of two groups called the Girondins and the Mountains, in which were the most dominant groups of the assembly. Keep this in mind as they will be important later in the Revolution. Now, the Legislative Assembly met on October 1st and ordered all aristocrats to return to France. The Assembly also ordered the arrest of all non-juring priests, which was then vetoed by the king. On April 20th of the next year, King Louis addressed the Assembly, asking them to declare war on Austria, Hungary, and Bohemia. Later, Prussia, led by Leopold II, would join on Austria's side. The Assembly agreed with the king and voted to declare war, with only 7 dissenters, which marked the beginning of the French Revolutionary Wars. Louis and Marie Antoinette did this and hoped that the wars would lead to the ruin of the revolution, while the deputies hoped that it would show the king and queen's treachery. Parisians and Republican soldiers invaded the Tuileries Palace, where the royal family lived, demanding the king to pass all decrees. As a result, the king took shelter in the Legislative Assembly, which got him arrested and imprisoned on August 10th. The Assembly thus suspended the king and established a national convention based on universal voting rights, in which replaced the Legislative Assembly. The National Convention voted to abolish monarchy and declare year one of the Republic. Next, they declared France a republic on September 21st, 1792. The trial for Louis XVI then began before the convention in December. On January 21st, 1793, the king was guillotined. His death alarmed other European monarchs, which caused France to be invaded. In fear of foreign invasion, the Jacobins seized the National Convention. The convention established the Committee of Public Safety, which included 12 men with ranging powers. The convention centralized power into the committee. In April of 1793, John Paul Marat was voted for impeachment by the National Convention for his published material that called for violent insurrection. He was later stabbed to death by Charlotte Corday, a Girondist, while bathing. Girondins in the National Convention wanted to establish the Commission of 12 to investigate anti-government activity in Paris. While Girondins were for this committee, the Jacobins were against it, voting to abolish it and influence the removal of Girondins in the convention. Robespierre was voted into the Committee of Public Safety in July. The National Convention decrees the levy en masse, and the commoners march on the National Convention. In response, the National Convention declared the Terror and expanded the revolutionary tribunals. Marie Antoinette was executed before the Paris Revolutionary Tribunal. The Terror brutally crushed all domestic opposition and arrested all persons suspected of treason. As a result, it turned the French against the Jacobins. After, the execution of the Girondist leaders began as the part of the Terror. As Girondists were overthrown, the mountains dominated the National Convention as their replacement. The National Convention passed the law of revolutionary at the end of 1793, which further increased the power of the Committee of Public Safety. In 1745, France adopted its new flag. In June, Robespierre is elected president of the National Convention. As he is leader, he addresses the convention to launch an attack on his opponents. Overnight, Robespierre's opponents planned for his arrest and execution. Thus, the committee is stripped from its powers and the moderates regain control of the convention. A series of treaties were signed in 1795 to wind down the revolutionary wars in Europe. The convention made many reforms that included the imprisonment for debt, abolished slavery, planned for the national educational system, and creation of the Republican Constitution. The Constitution of 1975 was passed, which enforced the Directory, a five-man executive. The Directory was incompetent and corrupt, making it last only 4 years, thus being replaced by Napoleon. The French Revolution was significant for its democratic ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Liberty, freedom for all; equality, equal treatment for all; and fraternity, brotherhood for all. It was also important as it emphasized nationalism because war became a concern. The French Revolution's ideals of democracy and nationalism also had a worldwide influence in Western Europe, Latin America, Asia, and Africa.